Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Wonderful, thank you. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered this evening at UBC Robson Square on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. My name is Mustafa Abednifard from the Department of Asian Studies at the University of British Columbia. And I'd like to welcome all of you this evening to our event, the second flagship lecture in the Alireza Ahmadian lecture series this year. And it's really great to see so many of you here for today's event. We're especially pleased to be here for tonight's lecture, Between Dusk and Dawn, Forugh Farrokhzad and the Art of Living in Between. Before we begin, however, I'd like to take a moment to thank the organizing team, my colleague, Dr. Alexandra Huffman, Razman, who designed our poster, and our behind-the-scenes team, Lisa, Farima, Ying, and Natasha. Thank you, all of you, so much for making this event possible. It is now my great pleasure to invite our Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Dr. Claire Crouston, who has been a strong supporter of the growth of Persian, Iranian, and Persianate studies at UBC, and of the shared commitment of the community to sustaining it. Under her leadership, the faculty is working to expand this program and secure the resources that will allow it to flourish for future generations. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Crouston. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Professor Abednifard, for the invitation to speak at this flagship Alireza Ahmadian lecture in Iranian and Persianate studies, and for organizing tonight's event. It is an incredible pleasure to be here with all of you today to reflect on the life and work of Forugh Farrokhzad, a voice of extraordinary courage, artistry, and enduring influence. We come together at a time when many in our community are carrying deep concern for loved ones and for the future of Iran. At the same time, we have been hearing clearly from our community, from those of you in the room and the wider community, that now more than ever, it is essential to preserve, teach, and share the richness of Persian history, literature, language, and culture. This includes ensuring that future generations can engage meaningfully with this heritage. At UBC, we are committed to strengthening Persian studies as part of that effort. And I'm proud to share with you some of our achievements to date. UBC is home to one of the most comprehensive Persian studies offerings in North America. In 2024, we launched a minor in Persian, Persianate, and Iranian studies. We also offer, and this is a wonderful statistic, the largest number of courses in this field of study in Canada. We are proud to have 4 tenure-track faculty who are here with us today, whose expertise spans Persian language, classical Persian literature, modern Iranian studies, and the broader Persianate world. This is an exceptional breadth for a program of this kind. For those of you coming in, there's still seats here in the audience, so please don't be shy to find a place for yourself, because we do have seats left. Let me take a moment to recognize and express my deepest appreciation for the extraordinary generosity of this community. Your support has helped make gatherings like this possible, including this very lecture series. I would like to thank Alireza's friends in the community who recently made a new $150,000 commitment to fund the lectures for 5 more years, as well as to establish a new student award in this field of study. That's wonderful generosity. Thank you. The community has also played a transformative role in advancing Persian studies at UBC, including the establishment of the professorship in classical Persian literature and culture, currently held by my colleague Alexandra Hoffman, who is here with us this evening. We are deeply grateful for your leadership, vision, and commitment. In an effort to continue the growth of the Persian, Iranian, and Persianate Studies program at UBC, we are seeking community support to raise $400,000 to establish a dedicated Persian librarian position together with a Persian collection enrichment fund. Together, these will help us expand access to critical materials, support students, including the graduate students that we are hoping to attract to this program, who will be the next generation of experts, scholars delivering lectures such as tonight's lectures, as well as our faculty members and researchers who may come to UBC to have access to the rich materials that we hope to have in our collection. This will ensure that Persian voices and histories are preserved and shared with future generations. If this resonates with you, I invite you to learn more. We have additional details in the case for support, which is available in the reception space this evening. And I know our faculty members who are here tonight would be thrilled to talk to you about their research and the ways in which having a research librarian at UBC to support their work will be essential for furthering their progress in their careers and for attracting more students to UBC. We would all be delighted to speak with you tonight or in the weeks ahead about how you might become involved in this important work. So thank you again so much for being here and for your commitment to community, culture, and learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Crafton. It is now my honor and privilege to introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Farzaneh Milani, Raymond J. Nelson Professor Emerita of Iranian Literature and Gender Studies at the University of Virginia. Dr. Milani's work has been foundational in the study of Persian literature and Iranian women's writing, bringing together literary analysis, cultural history, and critical insight in ways that have shaped the field over several decades. She has published numerous articles and books, most recently the literary biography of Forugh Farrokhzad with unpublished letters. In 2021, the Nobel Committee of the Swedish Academy invited her to serve as a member of its Board of External Experts for Literature, a role she held for 3 years. It is truly an honor to have you here with us, Dr. Milani. Please join me in welcoming Professor Farzaneh Milani. Thank you.
It is a privilege, indeed an honor, to be here this evening at this great institution and among such a distinguished audience. Thank you for the precious gift of your time. Thank you for your presence. I would also like to thank Dean Croston, who is here on a Saturday evening. I've been in the academic world for 42 years in the US, and I can tell you, it doesn't happen that often. Thank you, Dr. Dean. I also want to thank the Ahmadian family and friends, and Professor Mustafa Abedini Fard, who is truly a great scholar of modern Iranian literature and culture. UBC is lucky to have him. I had the great pleasure to meet last night the wonderful team, Iranian studies team at UBC, and Dean Croston. I want to thank you for collecting such a wonderful team at this institution. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues, please allow me to begin with a simple proposition tonight. In Iran, a multilingual, multi-religious, and multi-ethnic country, poetry has long served as a borderless gathering place. Across centuries of political repression and censorship, it has been a lifeline, not a luxury. It has been existential, not ornamental. It has functioned as a mobile public square in words. I first experienced the awe and enchantment of such a borderless gathering as a child. In one of my earliest childhood memories, my mother sits at the center of my world, her soft voice still dancing in my ears. As she opens a volume of Hafiz, kisses the book, closes her eyes in a silent prayer for the dead poet, opens it with her cigarette-stained finger, index finger, to a poem that she's convinced has chosen her. We, her 5 children, sit in a circle around her. We are sometimes joined by the women and men who help in our modest home. In that shared circle of listening, age and class, literacy, gender, and geography are all suspended, at least for the moment. Poetry, Persian poetry, becomes community, communion, and connection. It becomes our magic carpet, our passport to a world of wonder and mystery. Within this illustrious and revered literary canon, once in a rare generation, a poet appears who does not merely inherit tradition, but alters its very course. One such poet is Forugh Farrokhzad. Her voice reanimated the literary tradition from within itself. It echoed, answered, and enabled imagined conversation with what came before. Poetry, as I'm sure most of you will agree, is by its very nature something that enables imagined conversation with those who came before and those yet to come, with the living, with the dead, and with the not yet born. Poised at the intersection of here and there, now and then, self and other. It makes encounters beyond time and place possible. It builds bridges where there were once divisions and distances. So in that spirit, we can picture Forugh Farrokhzad in conversation with voices across centuries. Imagine, please, for a moment, a call rising from the early centuries of Persian poetry. It's a voice of Abu Sa'id Abul Khair. So I have the Persian for those of you who can read Persian, but I thought there will be some non-Persian speakers. So with your permission, I will read the poem in English and have the Persian for you on the screen. So Abu Sa'id Abu Khair says, come back, come back, come back as you are. Believer, unbeliever, idol worshiper, come back. This threshold is not the threshold of despair. Even if you have broken 1,000 vows, come back. And then, after 1,000 years, a clear, unhesitant, courageous voice responds. I have come, I have come, I have come. And the threshold is filled with love. And there at the threshold, I will greet those who love again, and the girl who is still there, waiting at the love-filled threshold. Please note that both poems and both poets return again and again to the idea of threshold, astane, dargah, dargah. I will return to this point later. For now, let me say that between that call by Abu Sa'id Abul Khair and the response by our poet Forugh Farrokhzad lies a long stretch of history, centuries in which threshold hardened into partitions and confining structures. Veils got thicker. Walls grew taller. Doors were shut, closed, and locked. Curtains were pulled, windows were covered, and they went blind. And all this in order to partition the space based on biology. All of this to marginalize women, to push them out of the public square into the Andaruni, into the delineated and surveyed inner space, the inner sanctum. Women's lives were increasingly privatized, their bodies were covered, their voices were muted in public, their desires were controlled, their movements were restricted. It was finally in the middle of the 19th century that women began to demand visibility, voice, and mobility. The genealogy of this desegregating movement can be traced to 1848, when a lioness of a woman, who was also a poet and a religious scholar, Tahireh Qurratul Ain, unveiled both her face and her voice and entered a gathering of 81 men present. Soon, she was condemned as a heretic and a harridan. She was strangled with a scarf, and her body was cast into a well. But the movement for liberation, the struggle for democracy and desegregation, for freedom of expression and freedom of conscience, could not be strangled. They could not be silenced. They could not be stopped. If Iranian women have struggled for nearly 2 centuries to undo segregation, knowing it to be the foundation of many forms of inequity and inequality, it is only recently that it has been named for what it is, a violation of human rights. As recently as October of 2023, a joint advocacy letter by an international coalition of jurists, scholars, and civil society actors called the United Nations member to recognize gender apartheid as such, as a violation of human rights. The accompanying legal brief articulated this system with stark clarity. I think it's a very good definition of sex segregation. They said gender segregation, they identified it as the removal of women and girls from public life, from parliament, offices, salons, universities and scholars, parks and playgrounds, and their sequestration into the smallest possible concentric circle, a mere dot of existence behind the front door, or rather behind the door of their closest male relatives, male guardians. But long before it was named in the United Nations, Iranian women had resisted gender segregation, not only in life, but crucially in language. As a student of women's studies, I believe what happened in Iran in 1848 is a pioneer of such a democratic movement in the whole of the Islamic world. Iranian women, poets and writers, were at the forefront of this movement. They refused erasure and exclusion. This was not a revolution that merely replaced one leader with another, but one that rewrote the very structure of power within each and every household. It reached into the most intimate spaces of daily life, unsettling inherited habits of authority and obedience, of domination and subordination. It reorganized age-old gender hierarchies and exposed the working of patriarchal power, not only in the public square, but at the level of the individual, the family, the language, and the body itself. Forugh Farrokhzad stands at the threshold of this bloodless revolution. She modified the very architecture of Iranian literature once and for all. It is no longer possible to talk about Iranian literature and name only men. She has inserted herself and inscribed herself the host. The summoned becomes the summoner. The object becomes the subject. The narrated becomes the narrator. The silenced becomes the voice. In the span of just 13 years, within a brief and incandescent career, and entering a literary canon long dominated by men, Farrokhzad unsettled traditional ways of being, of speaking, of seeing, and of relating to men, to other women, to the world, and most importantly, to herself. She challenged the linguistic, aesthetic, gendered, and political certainties of her time. She stretched the language into new registers, redefined femininity and masculinity, introduced new forms of self-representation, unveiled men as lovers, ma'shuq in Persian literature, and widened its thematic horizon by bringing into being an unprecedented range of concerns and subject matters. For Farrokhzad, poetry was not a craft. It was a way of being in the world, a mode of encounter. Writing for her was not a commodity to be traded. She knew the consequences of her choices, the comforts of selective silence, the rewards of a voice softened into compliance, the ease of performing resistance while yielding to the demands of oppression and injustice, but her horizon remained clear and her principles unshaken. With a voice at once candid, defiant, and vulnerable, and in that very vulnerability, audacious, Farrokhzad shattered the pact of invisibility imposed on marginalized lives. She wrote the alphabet of representation in a new way. She repositioned gender subjectivities, inaugurated a feminine aesthetic language, and redressed the very map of modern Iranian literature. She opened locked doors, drew back the curtains, crossed borders, trespassed boundaries, insisting on love, insisting on the love of beauty, truth, and poetry. She cultivated the courage to listen inward to her heart and outward to the world. She fought for the freedom to move, to speak, to choose, to desire freely, to take pleasure, to risk the unknown. And she refused confinement to a single space, a single role, a single story. So who was this woman? Who was this woman who chose iconoclast, Bot-shekan, as her pen name, only to become an icon herself soon after her early death? Who was this poet who reshaped modern Iranian literature once and for all? Farrokhzad Iraqi, better known as Forugh Farrokhzad, was born in December of 1934 in a family already, in its own ways, resistant to convention. Of 1936. Her parents had married for love in spite of parental disapproval. Farrokhzad spent the first 7 years of her life in Mazandaran before the family moved to Tehran, where she attended co-educational school and later later studied painting and sewing. But at 16, she fell in love with Parviz Shahpur, who was 11 years her senior, against the advice and the vehement opposition of the families on both sides. She married him and moved to Ahvaz. Their son, this is one of the only pictures of her wedding, and she's the one who made her wedding gown. Their only son, Kamyar, who unfortunately, as many of you know, had a very tragic ending to his life. In 1954, Farrokhzad published a poem titled Sin. It was a bold declaration of female desire that transgressed moral, literary, and social conventions of her time. It brought her immediate fame, but also a lot of notoriety. It fixed her in the public imagination as a defiant and unrepentant, sinful women. The layout of this poem in the magazine reshaped seemed designed to thin the separation between poet and poetic persona. As you see, she used her own name, which was not quite customary necessarily at the time, and she attached 2 photographs to the poem Sin. The man for whom Sin had been written, Mr. Nasir Khodayar, the editor-in-chief of Roshanfikr magazine, soon began publishing a serialized story describing in minute detail the love affair gone sour. Farrokhzad's husband and her father were furious. The scandal, compounded by familial anger, led to a period of profound personal crisis, including depression, a suicidal attempt, and hospitalization in Rezai Psychiatric Hospital. Forugh was given electric shock therapy without the administration of anesthesia. The marriage ended in divorce, still rare at the time. According to Iran's first national census, which happened in 1956, only 4% of women in Tehran were divorced at the time. As dictated by law, Farrokhzad lost the custody of her biological child, and she was denied even sporadic visitation rights with him. The loss of this maternal right haunt her life and her poetry. There is not a single picture about mother and son for the last 10 years of her life. Not yet 20, Farrokhzad left Iran for Europe, traveling through Italy and then Germany. The trip was transformative, but she said she could not live away from Iran and returned after 14 months, determined to achieve economic independence. Soon, she began working at Golestan Studio Film, where she formed a deeply consequential artistic and personal partnership with Ebrahim Golestan. This relationship has acquired an afterlife all its own. It has generated many rumors, recollections, fantasies, acts of myth-making, admiration, resentment, denunciation. Obviously, what sustained this enduring fascination may lie not in a single cause, but in a charged convergence of asymmetries, such as Farrokhzad's openness in life and Mr. Golestan's reticence. Her position as a single woman and his as a married man. Her transformation after an early death into a cultural icon that completely overshadowed him, and his long life marked by self-imposed exile and the absence of any culturally sanctioned space for acknowledgement of his grief, let alone mourning. A recently published letter Golestan wrote in 1967, a few months after the death of Forugh Farrokhzad, to his close friend and confidant, Sadegh Chubak, offers a glimpse into the depth of his loss and his unmooring, really existential unmooring. He writes, I walk and I see Forugh beside me everywhere. But I know she's not there. I hear her voice, but her words are only echoes, relics of what she once said. Nothing new, no words about new things. From window shopping to drinking wine, from watching play and films to reading books and meeting new people. Always, in all of them, I'm struck by the same aching thought and pain. If only she were here. You do not know what it means to go mad, but I have gone mad. And I can't distract myself or deceive myself with social ties or inherited relationships anymore. I cannot, and I will not. I will not lie to myself. There is nothing in this world that attracts me anymore. While the details of this love affair have drawn intense scrutiny, its intellectual and artistic dimensions have received far less attention, in fact, if any. The creative flourishing of both Golestan and Farrokhzad within this partnership is striking. And it is important to emphasize the mutuality of that influence. When 15 of Farrokhzad's letters were published in the literary biography of Forugh Farrokhzad, when after more than half a century of silence, Mr. Golestan agreed to grant me an interview without any censorship of either the letters or the interview. When we all saw that in those letters, Farrokhzad talked about 54 movies in 15 letters, analyzed them, talked about what she thought of them. When she talked about some of the most important artistic movements of her time, major writing about those letters revolved around why the love affair of Forugh Farrokhzad was divulged, why the letters of Mr. Ibrahim Golestan to Forugh Farrokhzad were not published. let me add here that Forugh Farrokhzad has written many letters, that almost 105 of those letters have been published. Not a single letter by a man to her has been published to this day. But this is subject for another talk. But one powerful expression of this intellectual exchange was Farrokhzad's turn to filmmaking. In 1962, she visited a leprosarium in northwestern Iran and went on to create a masterpiece of world cinema. This, by the way, is the letter of Ebrahim Golestan to Sadegh Chubak, recently published. You can access it at the Stanford University Iranian Studies. So The House is Black was revolutionary for its time. It was a hybrid work. It was at once a documentary and staged. It was visual poetry and philosophical meditation. It was, in a way, the biography of leprosy and its sufferers, but also the autobiography of a poet that was called the sinner. To make the film, Farrokhzad lived 12 days in the colony. She befriended its inhabitants, and she adopted a son. Hossein Mansouri, from that leprosarium. Please keep in mind that at the time, leprosy was considered a highly contagious disease, and yet Farrokhzad chose to live in the colony with the patients. Again, if I may add a personal note here, I've interviewed about more than 80 people for the literary biography of Forugh Farrokhzad. After I finally got access to 2 of the patients in the leprosarium, first, they were not willing to grant me the interview. And after much insistence, they finally agreed to be interviewed. And I want to confess here that I learned a lot more about the essence of Forugh Farrokhzad from those 2 people that I learned from a lot of other people. To return to Farrokhzad, the final decade of her life was marked by extraordinary creative intensity. She wrote poetry, essays, screenplays. She translated German poetry, edited an anthology, acted on stage and screen, painted, and maintained a remarkable body of correspondence. But at the height of her powers, her life was cut short in 1967 when she died in a car accident at the age of 32. Dying as she had lived in motion and with speed, she left behind a body of work that shaped and continues to shape modern Iranian literature. It also embodies and announces the emergence of a new Iranian woman. And yet, beyond all these accomplishments, I believe that Farrokhzad's most radical stance was positional. She lived and wrote on threshold, astane, between worlds, between selves, between the private and the public. And from these in-between spaces, she forged a body of work unlike anything modern Iranian literature had known. This is not a metaphor I impose upon her work. It is one she returns to again and again. The language and poetics of the threshold recurs across her poetry, her film, her letters, her interviews. She opens her opus magnum, Let Us Believe in the Dawn of a Cold Season, with these lines. Va in manam zani tanha, sorry. And here I am, a woman alone, on the threshold of a cold season, at the beginning of understanding the earth's tainted being, the sky's simple, sorrowful despair, and the helplessness of these hands of cement. In one of her most autobiographical poems, I will greet the sun again, ba aftab salami dobare khaham kard, written after a suicide attempt. And as you know, Farrokhzad attempted suicide, unsuccessful suicide, several times in her short life. She uses the word threshold 3 times in the final last lines. Her film, The House is Black, is equally attentive to threshold, returning to them visually again and again. So what is a threshold? The way I understand it, a threshold is an in-between space. It is at the intersection of seeming opposites. It's neither inside nor outside. It's neither beginning nor ending. It's neither black nor white. It is a charged space in which the illusory comfort of either or categories is resisted. Here at the threshold, there are no absolutes, no rigid divisions of perfection and imperfection, good and evil, right and wrong, or to borrow from Shakespeare, here fair is foul and foul is fair. Or, as Iranian storytellers always begin their storytelling, yeki bud, yeki nabud. There was one, and there wasn't one. A concrete visual example of a threshold is architectural. It's the entrance, but also the exit from a home. A threshold is not a doorway. It's not a line of demarcation. It's not a border. It's a space where different worlds meet without canceling one another. It's a space where departure and arrival, the collective and the individual, the private and the public coexist. That's why many religions, rituals, and collective wisdom have long recognized thresholds as places of both promise and peril, of vulnerability and adventure, where freedom carries the weight of responsibility, choice, and consequence. Across cultures and religions, such spaces have been marked by gestures of both blessing and warning. In Iran, for example, some families raise a Quran like a canopy above the head of a departing traveler at the threshold. Jews affix a mezuzah containing biblical verses to the doorpost. In Japan, torii gates marked passage from the ordinary world into sacred space. Such practices, and there are many all over the world, recognize risk and possibilities and adventures at once. In Farrokhzad's poetry, every ending carries the seed of a new beginning. Rigid oppositions dissolve. A poetics of simultaneity emerges, where light and darkness, joy and sorrow, love and loss appear together. Like the break of dawn, what we Persians call it gorgomish, that suspended moment when wolf and sheep, black and white, night and day, coexist just before the sun rises. Or like the rainbow, born of the meeting of two opposites, raindrops and sunlight. How much more time do I have? چقدر؟ 10? Okay. Okay. So I think what I'm going to do, with your permission, I'm going to talk, and because I still have a lot to say, so to cover it in 10 minutes, we'll do that. I wanted to give you some example of recent art forms that also have a lot of thresholds in them. If you have not seen the movie that was nominated for 14 Oscars, Hamnet, I recommend it highly. The resemblances with the work and the life of Forugh Farrokhzad will boggle your mind. This is Hamnet, and you see the threshold right there. The opera of Verdi, Aida, as you recall, the two lovers are buried alive, but in one of the most beautiful, sublime duet in the opera world. It's after they're buried that their grave becomes a singing grave. Shirin Neshat, who has remade Aida, and I had the privilege to see it, has this amazing scene where you see Aida again, and you see a boat in the ocean. So beginning and ending, life and death coinciding. And of course, in Egypt, there is something called the solar sheep that were discovered in Pharaoh's graves, believing that life and death are not opposites, that they are in a relationship. So in Forugh Farrokhzad's poetry, not only threshold, the word threshold, is repeated often, but windows, windows that are thresholds in walls are a governing metaphor. There are 49 references to windows in the poetry of Forugh Farrokhzad, and I want to read to you how she defines poetry, in fact, as a threshold, as a window. When Saedi, in an interview, and Mr. Tahbaz asked her to define poetry, she said, "Poetry for me is like a window that opens by itself whenever I approach it. I sit there. I look, I sing, I shout, I cry. I merge with the image of the trees, and I know there is a space on the other side of the window, and someone is listening, someone who might have lived 300 years ago or will live 200 years from now. It really doesn't make a difference. Poetry is a way of opening onto existence, of touching the wide horizon of being." So, after living and studying Forugh Farrokhzad for 50 years, and having shared with you some of the qualifying features of her poetry, I have come to this conclusion that what is truly unique about her poetry is her position at thresholds, is her capacity to look at both sides, to not have devoted her work, her positions to absolutes. I believe she wouldn't have been able to write the kind of poetry she wrote if it wasn't for her position as an insider and an outsider. Forugh was an exile in her own country. She was a stranger at home and among her own people. And that position of an insider and an outsider is what gave her the power to write about things that remain new even to this day. To the best of my knowledge, no one predicted the revolution to come in Iran prior to Forugh Farrokhzad. In this poem, I feel sorry for the garden, which is really almost verbatim prophetic of today's Iran. Look what she wrote in the 1960s. Our garden is lonely. Our garden is lonely. All day long, from behind the door, come the sounds of things falling apart, the sound of explosion. Our neighbors, all of them, plant bombs and machine guns instead of flowers in the soil of their gardens. They cover their pools and their tile basins without ever intending to become hidden storehouses of gunpowder. The children of our street fill their school bags with little bombs. Our garden is dizzy. Would the course of Iranian history have unfolded differently had our ruling elites trusted literature a little more? Might violence and bloodshed have been mitigated had political power listened more attentively to poetry's early warning? History offers no easy answers. Yet Farrokhzad's foresight, her insistence that the garden is being depleted of its green memories, and her plea that the garden can be taken to hospital can no longer be dismissed. The warning, like the plea, were in fact unheard. So I was going to talk a little bit also about how women life freedom, which happened in 2022. The Western world was for the main part shocked and surprised at how this movement came about. You know, the women, the Iranian women, who were presented often in books as voiceless, powerless, veiled entities, how could they suddenly come up with this women life freedom movement, revolution, whatever you want to call it? But the truth of the matter is that Iranian women have been fighting for their rights for almost 2 centuries. So women life freedom didn't come out of nowhere. It has a long genealogy. At least it goes back to 1848, when a woman unveiled herself publicly. Forugh could even predict that we're not talking about whispers in the dark, that this was there, but we chose not to look at it. And then I was going to show you and talk a little bit about, I'm very greedy and wanted to exploit your ears even more. I was going to show you something that I find fascinating. Please take a look at the archives. These are photographic archives. I'm not talking about the role of women in this revolution. They played a very important role. But these are the pictures of the constitutional revolution. There is not a single woman in them. And I doubt you will find a photograph of the constitutional revolution with a woman in the public arena. But again, we know that women participated in it. We don't have representation of it. And then look at the Islamic Revolution. Whereas women in large numbers took part in that revolution, progressively and little by little, they were segregated from men. And of course, in women life freedom, men and women appeared together. They held hands. They recited poetry together. They protected each other. Women life freedom was a performance of desegregation. Not only a struggle for liberation, but also an enactment of a revolution in Iran. An unfinished revolution, a third revolution, a revolution of women, unheard of in the history of the world. A revolution by women, about women, revolving around women's signs and symbols, but supported by men in large numbers, in unprecedented numbers. So I will end. I began with a dialogue, an imaginary dialogue between a 10th century poet and Forugh Farrokhzad, and I want to end in the spirit of threshold that comes people together and traditions together with another dialogue. As you know, our Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi opens his opus magnum, a world treasure, the Masnavi, with these beautiful lines. بشنو از نی چون حکایت میکند. Listen to the reed flute as it tells a tale of separation. For Maulana, dialogue begins with listening. And it is in the crossing from the reed to the flute, in becoming hollow, receptive, and attuned, that silence becomes voice, that words become one of the world's treasure trove. Centuries later, that same music rises again in the voice of Forugh Farrokhzad, flute in hand, freed from walls, borders, locked doors, and blind windows. She closes her masterpiece, Another Bird, her fourth poetry collection, with these lines. I know a sad little fairy who dwells in an ocean and plays softly on a wooden flute. A sad little fairy who dies every night from a kiss and is born again at dawn from a kiss. Riding those immortal waves in the middle of an ocean. And please let us not forget that Forugh Farrokhzad was also the poet who objected time and again in her poetry, چرا مرا همیشه در ته دریا نگاه می‌داری? Here she is on the waves. She is on in full view for everyone to see. She lives at the threshold between dark and dusk. And this, I believe, is where she invites us all to live. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Professor Milani. That was a fantastic, thought-provoking, really insightful talk. So we're just going to have a short discussion, and of course, with love. Today we have a large audience, and it's just great, again, to see such a very large audience. So we'd like to also to give an opportunity for Q&A. I'd like to start by the idea of revolution and also connect it to your fantastic core theme of in-betweenness. So you can also comment on, and I'm sorry that I had to cut you short, but so you can also comment on a little bit on some aspects that you didn't get a chance. We know that Farrokhzad's career actually started with some sort of a revolution with the publication of the poem The Sin, which you referred to, and of course I would love you to tell us more about. And also, as you mentioned in your more recent book, Words Not Swords, the freedom of movement, both literal and metaphorical, becomes very central to women's writing, which we can also see as you reference to, for instance, to her travelogues later.
To her
The travelogues, the
Yes.
travel diaries.
Yes.
And we know that both that poem and the travel diaries, as you also tell us in your book, they created such an uproar. Apparently, she crossed the border, which the society would not have expected her.
Yes.
Do you mind telling us a little bit more about what happened in that particular poem, what the reactions were, and also how Forugh, and unfortunately they chose to not hear her just by focusing on the moral aspects, how she reacted to that, especially in the afterword to the first collection. And unfortunately, it's not taken seriously most of the time.
It was deleted.
It was even deleted, exactly.
Yeah.
But then the first three collections normally are not taken that seriously. And what I love about your work is that you bring them to the center of discussions about Farrokhzad, therefore introducing Farrokhzad not just as a self-revelational, personal poet, but also as someone who has had a role in a tumultuous few decades in Iranian history. So she becomes a speaker for that, for those tensions. Yeah, sorry, that was a long one, but again, yeah, if you could tell us more about what happened over there.
I think the fact that from the very beginning, and from her childhood, in fact, we know now that Farrokhzad was different in her family, and in Iran, in the culture. She insisted always on a number of freedoms. Your wonderful writer in Canada, Margaret Atwood, talks about in The Handmaid's Tale about freedom to and freedom from. And Farrokhzad fought for both those freedoms all her life. But I think at the center of, in particular, her early works, the three first collection, it was a struggle to have freedom of movement, to be able to go places. As you know, sex segregation is based on the foundation of denying women access to their mobility, to going places. And once you do that, of course, you're denying them access to education, to all sorts. I had a little chart that. One of her early poems, one of her first poems, she says, به لبهایم مزن قفل خموشی که در دل قصه ناگفته دارم ز پایم باز کن بند گران را که از این سودا دلی آشفته دارم. She was at the time 19 years old, but she had seen the relationship between denying women their mobility and denying women their voices in public. And she was fighting against that. And then when she had to go on the trip, the travel narrative, it was a necessity in a way. She tells in the beginning of the travel narrative that I'm not going on this trip because I want to have fun, as if it was a crime to have fun. But she needed to express that because at the time, women could not travel alone, unchaperoned. In fact, I think even today, none of us, if we were in Iran, women, could travel without the permission of our male guardians.
I think still
They're fighting. There's been all sorts of back and forth, but I don't think even that law has been changed. So it's, I think, patriarchal cultures relies on marginalization of women. And I want to add parenthetically here that it's not only Iran, although in some Islamic countries, it's taken to extreme. I want to give you some examples. In China, women had their feet cut, you know, kafsh chini, 3.5 inches. Literally, they were cut. And why? A woman with a mutilated feet cannot have access to running and to freedom of movement. Think of some of the words we use for our counter-ideal people. How do we represent witches to this day? Often women, often flying on a broomstick. You know, the very sign and symbols of domesticity turned into a vehicle able to carry them to places. In the Persian language, harjai, used for a woman who is everywhere, is a word for prostitution, whereas God in the Quran is also harja, is everywhere. So when it comes to women, I can give you many, many examples. Let me finish with Cinderella, whose oldest version comes from China when they started cutting women's feet. And what's the one quality of Cinderella, other than having the feet that are the smallest in the whole country? In China at the time when foot binding started, beauty pageants were based on the smallness and the beauty of the feet. So movement, freedom of movement, has always been important, and it has been closely associated with the voice. Because voice, like your presence in the public arena, gives you a presence.
Absolutely.
Gives you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Milani. Of course, there are follow-up questions always, but I'd like to also ask.
Sure.
Yeah, Dr. Would you like to?
Sure, I don't have a microphone.
Oh, please, I'm sorry. I thought there was another one over there as well. But yeah, sorry.
No problem. Thank you so much. It's also good to face the audience and just see how many people have come. And I'm not sure whether it's you, Dr. Milani, or Forugh, or
It's
maybe
Forugh
both
Farrokhzad.
that
Forugh
have brought
Farrokhzad.
people here. So I'm very happy about that. And I would just like to remark on what you said in Forugh's poetry, how the guest becomes the host, and how you've done that so well today, and you have hosted this lecture really beautifully. It's really rare to hear an academic talk in such a poetic way. So I think you've done Forugh justice tonight. So thank you so much. And I also, I feel like we can connect today a lot, also about the image that you brought up in the beginning as Forugh's or poetry in general as a borderless gathering place. Yes. And I think it's such an important concept today, especially, of course, with Forugh, but also more generally for people today, yes. And what poetry means in times of pain and difficulty.
Yes. Yes.
So that's a very beautiful image. My question, perhaps, before we turn it over to our audience, who also should get an opportunity to ask you things, sure. Is really, how did you get Ibrahim Golestan to agree to give you his letters? How did you do that? I mean, I can imagine you have a very calm very lovely but fierce energy to you. Is that your secret?
No. Well, I will share a secret. I wrote my dissertation about Forugh Farrokhzad. I completed it in 1979, a few months after the revolution. I had a job offer to go back to Iran, to Tehran University, because my field was comparative literature. And then the revolution happened, and of course, our world lost its bearing. My professor, who was like a surrogate father to me, Professor Amin Banoni, and I acknowledge my great debt to him. He was an amazing scholar and human being. Called me soon after I had finished my dissertation and said, guess what? Because I had tried to interview Mr. Golestan, and he had not even responded. He said, he's here. I said, where is here? He said, at my house. Do you want to come and see him? And Dr. Banoni was a great chef. As a man, he was a fantastic chef. And I love cooking. And I think I'm not a bad cook. So Dr. Banoni said, come, we'll have good dinner, and you will get to meet Shahi. Ibrahim Golestan, his close friends always called him Shahi. I have to tell you, I couldn't sleep. He invited me for the next day. I couldn't sleep that night. I was so excited to meet this Prince Charming of Persian literature. I talked about unveiling of men in Farrokhzad's poetry. Prior to her, no man in Iran, and I feel bad for men, were desired by women. Yes, we have men and women lover in Iran, plenty of them, but they were all written by men. So it's themselves seeing themselves as the lover. Finally, a woman came along and saw them as the lover, and that's what I meant by unveiling the men. I was so excited about seeing him, and I was hoping that he will agree that he will come to my house, and I will invite all my friends to meet him, because everybody wanted to meet him. So I went there, and Dr. Banoni and Mr. Golestan, with whom I have the great honor to be friends now. Unfortunately, he passed away. But they were both opera aficionados. They were really, they would, in fact, they were going to travel to San Francisco from Los Angeles for an opera. And I love opera, but I was their student. They were talking about opera. So for about half an hour, or I don't know, an hour, I just sat there quietly, listened. Occasionally we'll say something that, oh, I understand that too. And then Dr. Banoni and Sheila, his wife, invited us to go have lunch together. And the first minute that they stopped talking about opera, and I had a little chance to jump in there, I asked Mr. Golestan about Forugh Farrokhzad. There was a silence, a deafening silence. He looked at me, and he has a very beautiful voice. He spoke beautiful Persian, and I'm in love with Persian language and in love with beauty. And it was wonderful to listen to him, but not to the content. So he looked at me and he said, Khanum Milani, Miss Milani, I've heard you're a good cook. The little innocent idiot that I was, I thought he's complimenting me. And with some joy, I said, where did you hear that from? He said, your teacher told me. And he's a fantastic chef. So if he says, you're a good cook, you must be a good cook. So I thought he wants me to invite him to my house. And I was very happy about that. But he continued. He said, I've heard you speak decent English. As you know, back then, we're talking about 1980, soon after my dissertation, there are no cookbooks in English about Iranian cuisine, which is exquisite. Why don't you write a cookbook? Still, when I talk about it, my heart gets. John? به فارسی چی گفت؟ گفت خانم میلانی شنیدم شما آشپز خوبی هستید. خیلی خوشحال شدم. کی گفته بهتون؟ گفت استادت امین. من دکتر بنانی، برای من دکتر بنانی بود. گفت امین گفته. میدونید که خودشم آشپز خیلی خوبیه. میدونید خانم میلانی کتاب آشپزی به ایرانی اون موقع نبود هنوز. نداریم. شما هم که تزتون رو به انگلیسی نوشتید، انگلیسیتون شنیدم بد نیست. چرا کتاب آشپزی نمی نویسید؟ برای اینکه دکتر بنانی بهش گفته بود که من میخوام بیوگرافی فرو. من واقعا 40 سال طول کشید تا این بیوگرافی رو بنویسم. اطلاعات پیدا نمی کردم. هیچکی حاضر نبود با من صحبت بکنه. یه عده کمی هم که صحبت کردن حاضر بودن، بیشتریا میخواستم بگن که معشوق فروغ بودن یا مسخره‌ام کنن. و واقعا چند نفر بودن در آمریکا به شما PhD دادن بابت یه خانومی که تا کلاس 9 فقط درس خونده.
And how long, Dr. Milani, after that, how long did it take you to get some information from him?
He sent me a message about 20 years ago.
Wow.
That he is willing to share letters with me. He later said in an interview that it was me insisting. And it's true, after he sent me that message, I didn't go back. I said, I'm not going to expose myself to that kind of insult. To me, writing a cookbook is a great honor. Anybody who writes a cookbook is a book. It's an honor. But he was using it to put me down, that you write a cookbook instead of the biography of Forugh Farrokhzad. So I didn't want to go, and I didn't go for a while. So he sent me a second. He said, I've been following your work, and I want to share with you the letters. And I thought about it, and my brother Abbas Milani said, you've been waiting for that all your life. Go and see what happened. So I went, at the time, Mr. Golistan lived in Bolni, a small village, kind of close to London. He lived in a castle. And
80 rooms, I guess. 80 or 83 rooms, I guess, in one of the countries.
Yeah, it was huge. It was huge. And he had an exquisite taste. I went there several times. I said, the condition is for you to also allow me to interview you. He said, yes, I will. So to tell you what happened, my first set of interviews, which were fantastic, because it was the first time he was talking after 50 years about 40 years at the time, about Forugh Farrokhzad. So it was raw. He cried, and I cried, and we fought, and it was really a great interview. But I was going to Iran at the time. And a friend of mine who was a dean at SOAS at the time said, don't take the interviews, the tapes with you. Back then, we didn't have this digital thing. There was the tape. She said, I will keep it for you. And I said, but on the way back, I'm not coming here. She said, I'll mail it to you. And they got lost. All the videos. And for a while, Mr. Golestan kept saying, that's baloney. They didn't get lost. But I knew, I mean, my friend, who is not in Iranian studies, had no interest in those tapes. Things get lost, accidents happen. So I said, I'm willing to come back if you're willing to grant me the same interview. It won't be the same. But he said, sure. But he didn't give me the letters. The letters took a while. And I will tell you, one of the moments I will never forget in my life is the day I was in his study. We had dinner, and then I said, آقای گلستان، نامه‌ها رو میدید یا باز میزنید زیرش؟ He said, they're ready. So we went, he went to his desk. You know, if I was a good cinematographer, I could make a movie of that, because I was so excited. And he went, and it was a manila envelope. I still have it in a safe deposit box. And I looked at it. I said, how many? He said, 15. And I said, oh, Mr. Golestan, I'm going to publish without a single word deleted. I don't believe in censorship. He said, they're yours. You do with them what you want. And the interviews I had to cut, because I ended up interviewing her for days and days and days. But I plan to publish all of them, because they're really fascinating.
I guess we can have.
I think
Yeah.
خسته
No,
نشدم.
I don't think. I haven't. I don't know. Yeah, you're so Shirin Bayan, so.
There is also, I
Sweet
heard,
talker,
things to
yeah.
eat. That's more Shirin.
I guess we can also have, a few questions from the audience, because I'm
Sure.
sure that they also would like to. If there is any questions.
There might not be
okay.
questions.
The gentleman, I guess, over there. Yes, right over there.
No. Yes.
Okay, you have a microphone.
Professor Milani, thank you so much for your impressive presentation. I learned a lot from Forugh Farrokhzad, and your presentation resonated a lot with the recent movie I watched, Sayare Doside Shade Man. So my question is about, you mentioned earlier you had a trip to the leprosarium where you had the chance to interview 2 people from the leprosarium, and that was really to the essence of the poet, and you learned more than the interview from many more people. So could you talk more about what you learned in the leprosarium and how it relates to the essence of Forugh Farrokhzad? Thank you so much.
The interviews.
The leprosy.
Yes, the leper calling.
Thank you. That's such a wonderful question. So thank you for asking it. You know, of course, I interviewed Mr. Golestan for days and days, and you know, I've interviewed Faroukh's family, some family, not the father. One of the sisters helped me a lot. Puran Khanum was very helpful. And writers and cinematographers and painters, people who were her colleagues. But they were all talking about Farokh as an artist, as the two people that finally agreed to talk to me about Farokh in the leprosarium taught me about her as a human being. And you know, Iranian literature, which I love, and you know, other than my children, my family, grandchildren, nothing matters more to me than literature, really. Iranian literature, I'm truly in love with it. But there are certain issues that we don't address. You know, there is an andaruni biruni. There is a tradition of taqiyeh. There is respect for the dead. You know, let's not get into the details. But so especially when you ask about people who have passed away, especially about Farokh, my feeling is that many felt guilty about how they had treated her. And in fact, you know, there is so much work to do on Persian literature in general, but on her, my field, I know, in particular, that how overnight the woman who was considered a sinner, you know, poems were written about her, criticizing her. When the film came out, which has the stamp of Forugh Farrokhzad on it, I call it, in fact, an autobiography of some sort. People started saying that it was the influence of Golestan, Mr. Golestan. And I agree, Mr. Golestan had a great impact on Farokh, but so did Forugh Farrokhzad had a great impact on Mr. Golestan. Last night with our colleagues, I was saying the movie, the first movie, Khesht o Ayene, could have not been directed if it wasn't for the presence of Forugh Farrokhzad in the director's life. I'm convinced of that. But the people in the leprosarium talked to me about the essence of Forugh Farrokhzad. You know, Picasso could paint a portrait with a few lines. I remember the first time, I loved the poetry of Apollinaire, a French poet. And I went to a colleague's house, and I saw a painting of Apollinaire, few lines. I said, oh my God, who did that? This is Apollinaire. He said, oh, it's Picasso. Picasso did. So with a few lines, he could reproduce the portrait of people. The people in the leprosarium did that for me. You know, let's not forget when Forugh went to the leprosarium. First of all, she went twice. The first time she went with Dr. Raji and decided to go back with a crew of 5 men from the studio Golestan film. I've also talked to one of the men, said nobody wanted to live in the colony. We were all petrified. Khanum Farrokhzad, the mother of Forugh, also told me, I was so upset when Forugh told me she's going to go to Baba Baqi. Baba Baqi? Why are you going there? You want to come back with Jozam? So people were scared, but she said, I have to go live with them. And when she was there, those 12 days, not only she adopted a son, Hossein Mansouri, a lovely human being who has translated his mother's poetry into Germany. He lives in Germany now. But the people, those two people, just loved her. So to just give you one specific example, I said, give me some examples of why you keep saying خانوم بود. همش میگفت فروغ خانوم خانوم بود. فروغ خانوم خانوم. خدا بیامرزش. خدا. She said there was a wedding. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie. It's only 22 minutes. And if you have not seen it, may I suggest, if you find the time, to see that movie. It's not an easy film to watch, but it will impact you in a way that it will be hard to put words to it. Anyway, this woman, Khanum Talebi was her name. She said, I went to Forugh and I said, Forugh Khanum, there is a wedding tomorrow. Do you want to come? And Forugh said, I would love to come. Can I take pictures? And she always was very respectful of them. And they said, of course, yeah. And she said, you know, the wedding was not very happy. There were a couple of musicians. For those of you who have seen the film, you see the musicians in the wedding. She got up. She started dancing at the wedding for the people. She had some bracelet. I suppose they were gold bracelets. She gave them to the bride. And she said, suddenly, the wedding, the atmosphere, was a completely different atmosphere. There was joy and, you know, this healthy woman. And you know, one of the messages of the film is a threshold message, that we are all sick in a way. And don't call these people and don't ostracize them just because of a medical conundrum that they had no control over. So stories like that, she told me quite a few, that she would kiss the children of parents with leprosy, that she would go sit and have lunch or dinner with them. She said when she left, there were people who were really sad to see him leave. Now, one last thing. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. You know, films about leprosy are very rare because the patients do not cooperate, because they've always been looked down upon. The focus has always been on the disease. Their identity has been denied. There are multiple identities, and has been reduced to a disease. Forugh didn't do that. The film doesn't focus on leprosy alone. It gives you a lot of information. I've shown the film in a couple of medical schools to talk about it. So you get a lot of unavailable information today about leprosy. But the patients cooperated. And that cooperation happened only because the director was Forugh Farrokhzad, who did the kind of things I just told you, and that I had the privilege to learn about through the people who knew her, and who didn't theorize, who didn't tell me about post-colonialism, but who told me about this information.
Okay, I guess we can have one more question. There are a lot of hands. Alexander, you please choose some. I'm sorry.
That's hard.
Yeah.
Do the gentleman right behind.
All right.
I want to add, if anybody has questions that we won't have time to,
Yeah, we could
please
extend it
come
over
to me.
then.
I will give you my email,
Wonderful.
and I will answer them.
Very generous. Thank you, Dr.
Of course, of course.
Thank you, Dr. Milani, and thank you, UBC Asian Studies. That's wonderful information we got about threshold. My question is about the mental state of Forugh. You mentioned her attempted suicides and its impact on her work. What do you find about the impact of her mental condition on her work? For example, the last poem you had on the screen, the last line was "The پری غمگینی که دوباره خواهد آمد از بوسه بیدار میشه." چیزی ناامید، something depressive. I don't see that. How do you interpret that impact?
Sorry, whose suicide? We might have missed that.
Forugh Farrokhzad's suicide, attempted suicide.
Attempted suicide.
And I read, I don't know whether it's accurate or not, the death, the accident he had at the end was another attempted suicide. I don't know.
Okay, all right. Thank you, sir. You know, in Iran, and I've been very interested in biographies and autobiographies and life narratives. We have, for a long time, we had very few. And now, of course, many people are writing biographies and autobiographies. Gaining information, detailed information about people is not very easy for a writer. My personal feeling, and I have to preface it with that all the almost 80 people, family, friends, neighbors, lovers, siblings that I interviewed told me that I was wrong, that they had never heard of that. But my feeling as a student of Forugh Farrokhzad is that she was abused as a child. I don't have all the details. No one was willing to share, if those who know. But I have been able to collect, because I've been studying her for 50 years, little tidbits of information that has, as دهن مردم پرید, jumped out of people in interviews. That I think make me sure that there was an abuse. Now, who did it? How long? Those I don't know the details, but I assure you, when all the letters will be applied, we'll know them, because I know also that there are lots of letters by Forugh that have not been published. I know there is at least more than 100. So, and I haven't been able to convince the people who have it to publish them. But they will eventually. As for the suicide, we knew about Forugh's suicide after her return from Europe. It was public property. Everybody talked about, not much, but you could easily gain access to that. However, only a few years ago, a friend of the family, the son of the neighborhood of Khadem Azad, medical doctor, wrote an article for the first time talking about Forugh's repeated suicide as a youth. It is, I'll be happy to send you that article. It is a devastating article. Now, prior to this article, I had interviewed the son of Forugh Farrokhzad. I have to tell you, I have interviewed many people who have never, before or since, because some of them are dead now, granted interviews about Forugh Farrokhzad, and I plan to give all those to either my own university or to perhaps Stanford has a nice collection of letters and stuff. For instance, the son of Forugh, Kamyar Shahpur, told me, and it's in the book, he said that I have bipolar disease, and I have inherited that from my mother. My mother had also bipolar disease. Now, in a collection of 57 letters that were published in اولین تپش‌های قلب عاشق من, the letters that Forugh wrote to her husband, there are repeated references to pardon me?
That's what she would call it?
No, repeated references to symptoms that people who have studied, and I really studied sexual abuse for a long time, that are clear references to sexual abuse. She doesn't indicate who, but it's clearly references to that. You know, we still can't talk about sexual abuse in Iran. So imagine a woman talking about sexual abuse, and there are at least 4 poems that are clear indication that it's a conversation, it's a discussion of sexual abuse. It's a woman who is gaining control of the situation, whereas the child that she was did not have control over. And they're very powerful. They are documents for the future of that. And I think because poetry is poetry, you know, there are different, poetry by its very nature is fluid. It accepts different interpretation. But when you see it in letters, where she openly talks about it, and the 57 letters in that book have been censored, unfortunately. So we know, and I have a feeling that some of those cut sections are issues about sexuality. To the best of the knowledge I have now, Farrokhzad attempted at least 5 suicides. But thankfully, she was saved in all of them. Now, your the last section of your question was about the death. I have interviewed one of the children who was in the bus. You know, Forugh loved speed and was driving a car, a Jeep, and she was speeding, and a minibus carrying children was approaching her. To avoid the minibus, she swerved, and she hit the side of the road. And then the detail of those moments are in the book. It was very close to Studio Golestan film. Mr. Golestan took her to a hospital. The first hospital didn't take her because she wasn't a government employee. He took her to a second hospital. The second hospital, they took her to an operating room, but they could not save her life. So the rumors that it was a suicide. Having said that, I have to add that it was a very depressive moment in Farrokhzad's life. Farrokhzad, throughout her adult life, starting with the age of 12, 13, and we know that because different people have told me that, started having episodes of depression. She would imprison herself in a room, and she had highs and lows. And she talks about those in her poetry too. And she talks about suicide in her poetry too. به آفتاب سلامی دوباره خواهم کرد is clearly about suicide.
Thank you so much, Dr. Milani. I'm sorry that I can't. Okay. Yeah, they want the space back. Okay, sure, yeah. We'll go with that as the final class if that is okay. But then, of course, you know, the conversation could be extended over
Sure.
reception later, and there are
Yeah.
some final remarks.
And as I said, if we can't get to your questions,
Yeah, and
I'll
honestly,
give
I
you
would
my
never get
email,
tired. I'm
my
sure I
phone
can
number,
speak for
you can
everyone.
call.
That's very generous of you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you very much for letting me to have this. Thank you very much for letting me to have this question.
Yes, louder, please. Thank you.
Yes, sure. Please let me ask my question in Farsi. اول از همه میخوام ازتون خیلی تشکر کنم برای این موقعیت فوق‌العاده‌ای که برای ما ایجاد کردین و این جلسه بی‌نظیر. من هیچ وقت تو دانشکده ادبیات به اندازه حتی 1/10 چیزی که امشب از شما یاد گرفتم یاد نگرفتم و من مدیون شما هستم برای این دانشی که در اختیار ما گذاشتین. این سوالی که دارم شاید شما نخواین راجبش حرف بزنین یا هر چیزی، با توضیحاتی که الان توی این سوال دوستمون شما دادین، خب ما به خاطر خصوصیات اخلاقی آقای گلستان واقعاً با اینکه یک هنرمند بزرگه شناخت واقعی چندانی ازشون نداریم، مخصوصاً در ارتباط با فروغ. آیا شما به عنوان یک پژوهشگر و کسی که بیشتر از هر کسی تونستین فروغ رو بکاوید و زندگیش رو بررسی کنید، رابطه فروغ و آقای گلستان رو به نوعی نشأت گرفته از همین احساس دوران کودکی و نوجوانیش میبینین؟ یه مرد خیلی قوی و که حالا به برداشت من از اون چیزایی که خوندم، حالا ممکنه در مورد فروغ اینجوری نبوده باشه، ما هیچ چیزی نمیدونیم، ولی آیا باز هم این ابیوز رو فروغ داشت در کنار عشقش با گلستان تجربه میکرد یا ما داریم اشتباه میکنیم؟ خیلی ممنونم از این فرصت.
البته خیلی ممنونم از لطفتون.
If you could maybe summarize the question in English.
Sure.
Yeah?
Sure.
So please correct me if I'm wrong, but and I'm probably this is unfair to your question because I'm going to shorten it a lot. So I think the lady is asking about the relationship between Forugh and the late Ibrahim Golestan and whether this was an abusive relationship. Yeah. I guess you were wondering why she was attracted to a man, for instance, you know, many years senior to her, with such features that he had, you know, within the confined norms of traditional masculinity. He was considered as a strong man, et cetera, right? Okay.
Yeah, you know, it's a great question. I want to start with two caveats. We still need to do a lot of research on the work of Ibrahim Golestan. And thank you for your question because I forgot to say that. I also want to tell you all that I now know I shouldn't have asked that question of Mr. Golestan. At the time, we're talking about early 1980. I was, I think, at the time, the only Iranian woman teaching modern Iranian literature in America. And as a teacher of modern Iranian literature, I shouldn't have asked the first question of a great scholar, of a great writer, of a great cinematographer about his relationship. I should have asked him about his own work. But at the time, I was not interested. And I feel ashamed. I should have been. I should have been interested in his work too. I was a teacher of modern Iranian. I didn't only teach Forugh Farrokhzad. So I acknowledge that his response was perhaps a little too rough for a young person who had just started teaching. It really silenced me. But he was justified in being angry. So that's in response to the other question. There are a few sources that we can go to answer your wonderful question. There are the poetry of Forugh Farrokhzad, her film, her letters, her interviews. There are all the work of Mr. Golestan. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with her work. They are exquisite. They are exquisite Persian and profound and fascinating. ببخشید. There aren't too many. The last 10 years, things have started to change, and it's fantastic. We haven't studied those. And now, that one letter that I read, and if you read the whole letter, I couldn't read the whole letter, you will see how devastated he was. And then, of course, we should talk to people who knew both of them. And unfortunately, most of them are gone now. Now, the poetry of Forugh Farrokhzad tells us that this man entered her life and changed it. She says it herself. I'm not putting words in her mouth. Now, was the relationship free of any tension? Was the relationship at the beginning of the 8th year the same as it was at the end? No. And we have not had a time to do this kind of nuanced, in-depth analysis of either the poems of Forugh to see how it changes her representation of Ebrahim Golestan. You know, the poem Fath Baq, آن کلاغی که پرید از فراز سر ما و فرو رفت در اندیشه آشفته ابری ولگرد خبر ما را خواهد برد به شهر. همه میدانند. I can't read the whole poem. It's a beautiful poem. It's a rewriting of the story of creation through this relationship. If Adam and Eve were expelled from paradise because of their love, in this poem, Adam and Eve enter paradise after they fall in love. It is a beautiful, unusual rewriting and revision of the story of creation. And we know she wrote it for him. She said it herself. So, but then there are also poems like با آفتاب و این منم زنی تنها در آستانه زن و زخمهای من همه از عشق است، از عشق، از عشق. So we have those poems too. During those 8 lines, we have to be able to understand a better evolution, devolution, revolution in that relationship. But with the knowledge I now have of Mr. Golestan, with the honor of his friendship, and with what I have read in the letters, in the poems, in the interviews, in the essays, everything, I think it was a very emotionally intense, sexually tumultuous, intellectually nurturing relationship for both of them. Forugh Farrokhzad has said that Forugh loved men who were older, like her father. And she has psychoanalyzed her sister, saying that because our father never showed love and affection to us, Forugh was constantly in search of that love. Now, I had had the privilege of also friendship and long hours of interview with Kuli, the other sister, who never granted interviews. I think she did one when she was young, or she gave a letter to Aydin Aghdashlu, the painter. But other than that, she refused to talk. Some of the closest members of Forugh's family have never given interviews. Mr. Shahpur, and I begged him over and over, through Kamyar, who became a dear friend. He refused. The co-wife of Mrs. Farrokhzad, the mother, Turan Khanum, we didn't even know about her. I interviewed her. It is a fascinating interview about how the life of the Farrokhzad family was destroyed after this relationship. The second, which was not the second wife. Mr. Farrokhzad had previous wives. But it was a co-wife who was brought to live in the house of the Farrokhzad family. I want to tell you one last story, if you allow me, and then we say goodbye. I promise to make it short. Do you know how Mrs. Farrokhzad learned about her co-wife? So she had noticed that Mr. Colonel Farrokhzad was not paying much attention to her, was not as kind as usual, but couldn't understand why. She had just given birth to her 7th child. And that woman had a sad story. She witnessed the death of 4 of her 7 children. While she was alive, 4 of her 7 children died. So one day, Mr. Farrokhzad announced to his wife that we're going to have very important guests. Clean the house, get wonderful shirini, fruit and vegetables, no, not vegetables, and sweets. Vegetables, we get them here. In Iran, we get sweets and tea and fruits. And so they did, and Khanum Farrokhzad told me she was so happy that husband is joyful again and has guests. And he later announced that the family is coming as suitors to Turan, the first daughter, the eldest sister of Forugh Farrokhzad. They came, and was apparently a very handsome man, a prince from the Qajar family, and everything went beautifully. The family decided, of the groom, decided to come back next week, and with the permission of the parents of the bride, they were going to bring the wedding ring. Not the انگشتر چی میگن اون اولشو. So they were preparing for the second visit, and one day Khanum Farrokhzad is summoned to the door, the entrance door. And she goes there, and it's a woman. She says, "Kojai, where are you? How come you don't understand what's going on?" And Mrs. Farrokhzad didn't know her. Said, "The groom is the brother of your co-wife. حواست کجاست? Where are you?" She says, "What?" She says, "The sister who's been here a couple of times, one time, and is coming back, is your co-wife. And now the father wants your daughter to marry the brother who was in medical school." So that's how Mrs. Farrokhzad learns about the existence of Mrs. Bahindukht Darai. Now, I found Mrs. Bahindukht Darai in Rasht. I went there. It was, honestly, I had to search everywhere. I said, I have to find her. This is instrumental. And I went to the door. I knocked. She opened the door. Didn't know me, of course. I said, Khanum Dr. Darai, she had a PhD in literature. Said, I tried my best to be polite and said, خانم دارایی اسم من فرزانه میلانی، من از آمریکا اومدم و سالهاست دارم زندگی نامه فروغ فرخزاد رو میبرم. اینو که گفتم در اومد به من ببنده. The minute I said Forugh Farrokhzad, she wanted to lock the door. It sounds melodramatic, but I've never done this in my life. I put my hand in the door. I really did. I said, after all this time, I found you. I'm not going to let you shut me out. And she said, I'm not going to talk to anyone about her, about that family. I said, I've come all the way from Tehran. Doesn't your Iranian hospitality demand that you at least offer me a cup of tea? So, Mazlum Bazi. It worked. It worked. I had my tea, and I had an amazing, it's in the book, some of it, and hopefully all of it one day. I felt really bad for her. You know, her brother and her father were involved in politics. And Mr. Farrokhzad had gone to Zanjan. They were going to be apparently hung because they had betrayed the system. And according to what she told me, and it's in the book, after a while, she said, "You marry me, I will free them." And she did, and the two were freed. And I said, "But did you love him too?" And she said, "I hated him." I said, "How did your parents feel, your brother and your father feel?" She said, "I never told them because they would have felt miserable." I mean, if I have learned one thing when I researched this book, and thanks to the teaching of Forugh Farrokhzad, is to have a threshold view of things, to try to look both ways. Thank you. اجازه میدید تموم الرحمن رو بگیم.
Thank you so much, Professor Milani. I hope everybody agrees that we see references to Shahrzad, 1001 Nights, in your scholarship a lot. I hope everybody agrees that you are the Shahrzad of Iranian literary studies, actually. Such a good storyteller. Thank you. Just very quickly wanted to mention also that I know everybody wants to just 1 minute. So we would also, I'd like to briefly highlight an upcoming initiative at the University of British Columbia, which is a collaboration with Cambridge University, and it's basically under the guiding of Dr. Dehghani. He's here. It's going to be a conference next year, so please reach out to him and ask about that. It's a wonderful initiative. Otherwise, thank you so much to everyone for being here. This was wonderful, wonderful discussion. Please, there's a small reception outside, but I guess I'm not sure how much time we have, but please enjoy thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.